Hi, I'm Chris from Future Music. We're here with JC from M Audio, who's going to be showing us the Trigger Finger Pro. It looks like it might be a bit of an exclusive for NAMM 2014 today on video, so I'll hand you over for JC.
I'm excited to show you, 10 years ago we came out with the Trigger Finger, which is one of the world's first drum pad MIDI controllers. And we've taken that to the next level with really one of the world's first fully integrated drum controller sequencers. Now you're wondering what I'm probably saying by fully integrated. Unlike having to learn an entire ecosystem of your rhythm creation or any of that production, we basically have designed this with enough flexibility so you can incorporate into whatever workflow you already have. We have basically, this is the hardware sequencer. You have three main UI settings. You have a pad UI where you control the pad, where you have an arsenal mode with the software that I'll get into a little bit later, or MIDI mode where everything is fully assignable. You can assign MIDI CC channel pressure to each pad, different MIDI channels to each pad, and basically you can even change the colors of the pads. So if let's say you want the top row to be effects and whatever, VI or anything you're using, you can do that, and you also have 4 banks that correspond with the pad color. You also have 4 control banks. The controller section of the Trigger Finger Pro is where it starts to get really, really flexible, because your transport you can have put into Mackie mode, Huey mode. Your DAW control you can put into Mackie mode or Huey mode. And one of the reasons why this is actually pretty exciting is because each DAW manufacturer has tailored their implementation of Huey or Mackie control to their specific DAW. For live, for example, the button cluster in live will go in between clip launches. So you can scroll between your clip launches, where in Pro Tools, it's more oriented to basically doing audio editing and kind of more of their workflow. This section right here, the control section up here, you have 4 knobs, 4 faders, and 4 buttons. Each one of these is assignable to a different thing. So if I wanted to, I could assign this to Arsenal, which is the software component. You can assign these to Huey or Mackie control, so you'd be able to control any of your level faders, whatever, or a min-max value, let's say assigned to the buttons, and going to your drum synth at the MIDI DIN. I mean, this is where it starts to get really exciting with the flexibility of this, because if you have everything synced to the same MIDI clock, you can have things launching clips in live with this while you're playing a sequence that you've already sequenced on board, while you're playing a drum synth via MIDI DIN, and it all worked together perfectly. Like, we work with everybody. When we set out to design this thing, we wanted to design it in a way where it'll work with absolutely everybody. And then we get into the sequencer focus, where this is a 16-step, 4-bar sequencer. Depending on how long it is your time division, like any other sequence, with 64 parts, because each one of these actually corresponds with a pad bank. So beyond having to sequence all this other stuff, you can go deep and deep and deep. And basically, with the flexibility that you can have, let's say some going to the software component, another bank going to your hardware sequencer, you can even be launching clips in another program, not from here, but from here. It's completely fully integrated into what you already know. You will not have to learn a new software, and you will not have to learn a new production workflow. And aside from actually playing the drums, one of the most intuitive ways to lay down a really quick rhythm is with the step sequencer right at the bottom. The Arsenal software, what I mentioned earlier, right now I have it instantiated in live, but the Arsenal software will instantiate as an AAX, AAU, or VST. I just have it in live right now because that's the DAW I chose to do it in. Air Drums is a VST that you load within Arsenal. There's a sample playback module. It's a VST that you load in here, but you can load pretty much any sounds you already have, but also we're going to be shipping with 8 GB content. The 8 GB of content are coming from like Tool Room Records, Black Anomaly, some big names. So we're putting serious resources into actually getting really good sounds. Now, if you've ever used the Air plug-in transfuser, this will be pretty familiar to you. This is a kind of a subsidiary of that, where we added some new tweaks onto that. This sequencer, you can load 2 samples on top of a pad. You can load it to 64. It does all correspond with the pad bank. You can load loops into it. It will time correct for Rex files. So if you have like a 2-bar loop and you have a 4-bar sequence going on, if you trigger that loop in the sequencer or for a pad, the downbeat of bars 1 and 3, you'll have a continuous loop to go along. It also has basically kind of a random start function, which sort of emulates a lot of drum machines because it won't hit you exactly on the downbeat of the wave. It'll kind of just randomly select, much like some electrical impulses work. We're also going to be shipping, I don't have it here, but we're going to be shipping with Hybrid 3, which is another super powerful air instrument. So you get some melodic stuff too. You can program, you have to get kind of creative programming melodies with the drum pads, but if you have a keyboard controller or anything like, we're basically giving you an incredible production solution if you have any kind of DAW. You can also instantiate Arsenal as many times as your computer can handle, and Arsenal also works as a basically auto mapping protocol. So I'm circling the cursor around this section, which is a one-for-one emulation of the hardware section. There are 4 banks of this section. So if you do the math of basically having 12 controllers times 4 times, you have 48 assignable parameters for any VST that you load into Arsenal. The nice thing about air drums is because you have all of these effects assigned to what can be 64 pads, when you do the math, there's something like 12,000 assignable parameters. This lets you really break down what you actually want to control with what's going on here. And with the flexibility, you can just switch between HUI and controlling this pretty easily. So once again, it integrates into your workflow quite nicely. Arsenal also works as a kind of librarian for your VSTs. It will take the tags from any VSTs and assign them to your instrument type. This is the plugin, because right now in the system, the only plugin I have installed is Air Drums. But the style, articulation, set list, and when you start making presets within any of your VSTs, the presets will be stored in these lists, and you'll be able to get through the hierarchy much easier. And that's not just for Air Drums, it's for any VST. So you can take anybody's VST and anybody's DAW, load that into Arsenal, and it will be completely mapped to your workflow. We have the flexibility where you can do basically whatever you want. If you're, let's say you're a Pro Tools or Logic user in the front end, and that's how you do your production, and that's how you produce tracks, you can use this. However, once you take those loops or tracks or whatever you produce, some guys, produce in one DAW, and then they perform like in, say, Ableton Live. Well, because this has the flexibility, you can do that completely, you can do that in the entire workflow. This matches what you want to do. When you get onto the actual sequencer, the sequencer loaded, is you can start getting some fun live stuff going, as you have a mute mode and a solo mode, where you can just start muting parts really easily within let's say, any given sequence. So I'm going to launch a sequence right now to show you some of just the performance aspect of the controller that you have. So right now I have basically a 16-pad sequence going, triggering Arsenal. You have a mute mode where, let's say for example, if I did have some clips launched in live, everything would be synced. I could have a loop be playing with this, and I want to bring in my sequence kit that's currently on the hardware. Well, this is a quick and dirty way to show it, but you just start bringing in parts, or you can unmute all. You also, in Arsenal right now, I have pitch assigned to this fader, and the cutoff. So it's really easy to do, like just an effect like, let's solo the drum kick, and just like bring that up, and then when the cutoff the filter's open, and just hit something like that. Like I said, really quick and dirty, easy ways to do things. The flip side of that is you have a solo mode where you can basically just start, I'm back in mute mode. The solo mode where you can just the flip exact opposite, where this is also really helpful when you're producing, when you're working with a step sequencer, because you can start figuring out your parts really quickly. There's also next sequence mode on solo all. So we'll get this going again. So this right now, I'm playing a sequence. You can load up to 16 sequences on the hardware right now. You can either record those sequences into your DAW just as MIDI, or you will be able to upload and download them into kind of a MIDI, into a librarian. So let's say if you have 16, so you'll still be able to work with them with the step sequencer without being limited to 16. So next sequence mode, for those of you who know MPC, this will be familiar to you. But right now, this is loaded in sequence slot 4. And basically I hit 5 at the end of the sequence, it'll already go into whatever's unloaded on 5. So if you're loading a song, let's say you could have basically chorus, verse loaded into the sequencer, and either while you're doing production, you can record that into your DAW as a song, or when you're performing, you can simply start moving things around. A really nice thing about this too is you have a choice of either locking the timing of your next sequence to the previous sequence, or doing a complete new sequence, because what happened 4 right now is at a certain tempo and a certain swing. I want 5 to be in that same tempo and swing, even though when I originally made sequence 5, it was a completely different tempo and a different swing. So if I go back to 4, I'm going to take the timing off, it's a new sequence, and it'll go back to 5, and it should play in a completely different rhythm because it will play back with the tempo and the swing. So now we have swing, and now we have a slower tempo. So that's one of the actually really nice things about, I mean, you can basically load songs and sequences onto this and have the flexibility of taking things and just doing, say you have a 4 on the floor, you want to keep it a 4 on the floor, or you want a sequence that you had a bunch of sequence with a ton of swing in to match with a 4 on the floor, just lock the timing, do the next sequence, and it'll automatically kind of do that for you. But if you don't want to do that, you have the choice.
So I've just jumped back in to ask you a few questions.
Yeah.
So a little bit just about developing it and why bring the trigger finger back, and what the ideas were behind it.
Well, the trigger finger name still has cachet, and people still use the original trigger finger. When we started kicking it around, we thought about just doing another just drum pad controller and calling it trigger finger. But with kind of the way the technology has evolved, with the brain of this thing, we figured that we could do something much, much, much cooler. So we started just kind of toying around and realizing that there are a lot of people now, there's kind of a hardware resurgence and for drum modules, and nobody's really doing a hardware sequencer to match those modules. So then we're like, well, let's do that, but let's also do it with a software component so we can bring both worlds together.
So I mean, how difficult was it developing the software side? Because that's kind of the newest side, because obviously M Audio and trigger finger and stuff is known for hardware, pads, that kind of stuff. But this is the kind of the fresh side.
Well, we actually have two very good in kind of the NMusic brand family software companies. So with Air and Sonovox, we have a lot of resources where we could start speccing this thing, and a lot of them have expertise in doing kind of this. Like I was saying, I mentioned Transfuser earlier. Air Transfuser is a really powerful VI that used to just live in Pro Tools. It's been ported out to other DAWs, but there's a lot of IP that we can pick and choose from that's really good IP.
So I mean, with that in mind, with the NMusic brand, how do you sort of make a product like this and it not tread on the toes of sort of an MPC and things like that?
The workflow is very different than MPC. People who like MPC workflow, and so we're kind of like an all things for all people. Is kind of what we're taking, because I mean, a guy who really likes the MPC workflow is going to use an MPC. If somebody likes to use this 16-step sequencer instead of sequencing with the pads, we want to give them an option too. Either way, we're keeping it in the family.
Okay. I mean, was the MPC developers involved in some of the software side? Because it's
Yes.
that kind of okay.
Yeah. The pads, we've leveraged a lot of the way the pads feel from MPC. I mean, it'd be silly not to, because I mean, you have something that's well known and that good. You're going to take from it.
And in terms of using it just as a controller outside of the software, I mean, this sequencing can kick out via MIDI to other VSTs and stuff like that.
Yes.
No problem.
Yes.
And another thing, I just want to mention, when you've mentioned it, the content from people like Toolroom. How did that come about, and is that going to be something that expands?
Yes. This is just the first in a long relationship that we have with those. M Audio has a long history with electronic music production and electronic dance music. So it only made sense that we'd kind of renew that with a product like this, which is absolutely perfect for that workflow and that kind of production.
So you see this more as an electronic dance music product. That's another way that separates you from the MPC, because the MPC crowd is slightly more urban orientated, I guess, with its history and its legacy.
Yeah.
So this is a bit more focused with step sequencing, maybe on dance music.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I did notice, you've got this cool stand here, but there's is there an option to move it? It looks like there's sort of...
Yes. One of the things we noticed, and also for me personally, because you can't really tell I'm sitting down now, I'm really tall, and for ergonomically, if you're on stage or for performing or standing up, it's actually nicer to have the unit kind of tipped like this, so you're kind of over it like this instead of trying to get like that. So this stand basically just pops off and you can reverse it, and on stage like this. Because I've been going to clubs, you see these guys performing with drum pads and stuff, and they'll have like a 2x4 or something duct tape to get that angle they need. And so we just put it on the product. Cool.
And I mean, is there going to be accessories for it as well, like bags and all that kind of touring stuff?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll figure that one out. I mean, it seems like maybe. I'll keep it at that.
And finally, when's it going to be available, and how much is it going to be?
This spring, in the U.S., it'll be $3.99.
Okay.
I'm not sure how that'll translate to the UK.
Okay. Nice. Thanks very much.